Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Lifestyle Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Stefan Batory, who's the co-founder and CEO of Booksy. Stefan is an ardent serial entrepreneur, innovator who is developing curated companies that are now leaders in his home country of Poland. Stefan had developed his latest startup, Booksy, out of personal frustration on trying to schedule appointments over the phone or via text. Prior to Booksy, Stefan was the founder and CEO of SensiSoft, a software development company with a focus on classified media. During that time, he created and bootstrapped iTaxi, which disrupted the outdated service industry to transform the way people in Poland hail taxis today. Stefan is a visionary, but also a strong analytical and dedicated entrepreneur. And he's an accomplished ultra marathoner who's conquered the Gobi Desert. And Books has recently raised around $70 million with a total of $120 million in funding. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you, Rohit. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So you're a very interesting journey because you lived in Poland and you moved to US.
Mhm.
How was life while growing up in Poland in 1970s?
Well, that was a strange time because back then Poland was still a communist country, so we had pretty much empty shelves. There was like shortage of supply. People struggled. Doing some basic daily stuff like raising your kids and providing for them and getting anything you would need to raise a kid. It was very difficult for my parents. So I raised watching them struggle with raising us, with providing. It wasn't even about making the money because in communism everybody makes pretty much the same and they make not enough. But it was even harder to buy food, to buy clothes, to buy things like toilet paper. So we went through a lot of hardships like everybody in Poland back in these days. And I guess this is something that made me very resilient nowadays.
Interesting. And while you're growing up, how did you always believe that you could get into entrepreneurship and startups, and what got you more involved when you were living in Poland?
Back in 1989, when Poland overthrew communism and we embraced democracy and capitalism, my parents, they started a small business. First, they launched a grocery store. Then they launched a wholesale business, and as the next step, they started like a small baby clothes factory. So I've looked up to them. My brother and I and my sister, we were all helping them running their business, doing some day-to-day operations. Basically, at some point, we were, going to school and after school working in those businesses. And back then, I wasn't even thinking about myself as a future entrepreneur, but it became part of my life. It became part of my daily routine. And then I started experimenting with my own ideas. Like, I bought a fish tank and it was difficult to get fishes. So, I started trading with my friends and then I started breeding fish. And then I realized like, wow, maybe I could make, a lot of money selling the fish. And then I got a few more tanks, started breeding them. But then, I realized how difficult it was to keep the water temperature correct, to feed the fish, because like even though it was just the beginning of capitalism, we still lacked a lot of tools and resources people had in the West. So my parents and my family, they were looking at me like I was crazy because I said I'm gonna make millions breeding and selling fish, and I never made any money with that. Actually, I lost a lot of money buying all the equipment and tanks and fish. Then I had a few other ideas and they were always looking at me like, I'm this crazy kid, trying to do crazy things that never work out. So after a couple of years of being like that, I got talked into being a scientist. Like everybody in my family knew I was like good with math and physics and computer science. So they said like, instead of like trying your crazy ideas, why don't you focus on science? And I said, okay, that makes sense. So I was looking, to have career in science, and going through high school, even going to college, like that was my mindset. Like I didn't really think about being an entrepreneur anymore. I thought I was like too crazy to do that. But in 1999, I met a few friends. We were all working at a startup that was like one of the first internet companies in Poland. I guess the easiest way to frame it, it was like clone of Yahoo back then. And we didn't like the way the company was managed. We didn't like, the way the direction the company was taking. And we thought, we would leave the company and start our own business. So that's how I came back on the entrepreneurial path. And in January 2000, we started EO Networks, which was my very first business. And it was a software development house. However, I wasn't meant to run it. There were 3 guys that were supposed to run the business. And I was the CTO, and 4 other friends were software developers. So I was leading, the tech team. But after 2 or 3 months, the 3 guys that were supposed to run the business, they decided to quit it because the .com bubble burst, and they didn't see future in selling internet services and making internet software. So they decided to leave and left 5 of us poor IT guys that didn't know anything about the business. I didn't know anything about sales, about marketing, about running a company, about paying taxes, about hiring people. Like I knew nothing. I just knew how to write code, how to do software, how to create platforms. But the other 4 guys just looked up to me and they said, "Hey, Stefan, why don't you lead us? Why don't you become the CEO?" And that's how I started learning how to run business and how to do everything from scratch. So the first couple of years were really tough, really hard. We didn't make any money. Like in fact, we lost a couple $100,000 in the first couple of years. We should have filed bankruptcy. But I didn't want to leave people, behind with debts and unpaid bills. So I decided to work as hard as possible to pay off all the debts and then close the company. But after we paid off all the debts, I realized, hey, maybe there is something, in it, and maybe I should just continue. And then the company started growing really fast, and Deloitte put us on their list of the top 50 fastest growing companies and in Central and Eastern Europe for 7 consecutive years. Like we maintained over 100% growth year over year for the 12 years I ran the company.
Wow, I think that's a great story, and you started young as an entrepreneur, and there's a lot of talk across ecosystems that VCs would back older founders, or VC would back younger founders like Mark Zuckerberg and all. But do you think it really matters if you start young? You have Y Combinator saying that the ideal age to start is around 23, 24, but it's not. What are your thoughts? When should a founder actually get into entrepreneurship?
I guess the sooner the better, because like you have nothing to lose when you are young, fresh out of college. You have no family, no mortgage. It's just easier to take riskier decisions. So it was serendipity now when I look at that. But I think I was blessed that I started my first company at, I guess, 22 back then. And I could make all those mistakes and take all the risks because I didn't have to provide for a family. I didn't have to take care of anybody. I didn't have to worry that if I fail, then somebody is gonna get maybe not hurt literally, but that my kids wouldn't get proper education, or I wouldn't be able to put food on the table. So I think the younger you are, the less you have to lose. But on the flip side, the one thing that I wish I had done is maybe worked for a bigger company before I started my own company, so I could see how those bigger companies are run, how you manage a bigger team, how you implement processes, because this is something I've been missing for all these years, because like anything I did was bigger than I did it a year ago or six months ago, and I had to learn it the hard way. I had to like, figure it out literally from scratch, because I had no role models. I had, nobody I could look up to. So maybe working for a couple of years for a bigger company, maybe getting experience and doing something in a big, in an environment that has already been successful could have taught me maybe and prepared me for running my own company better. I don't know, that's just my speculations, but that's the only thing I maybe not regret, but sometimes I think like maybe I should have done that before I started my own company.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting insight. Work for a big company and start as early as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you get your start in Booksy? What was was it a personal pain problem that you were trying to solve?
Yeah, that was my very own problem. At that time I was trying to lose weight, and
Okay.
I got into running, and then I loved it so much. I started running marathons and ultra marathons, and I was preparing for one of those races. It's called Marathon des Sables, and it's considered the toughest foot race on earth. 6 back-to-back marathons across Sahara Desert in self-sufficiency formula. So you have to carry a backpack with all the food and supplies you need to survive a week in the desert. I was ramping up my mileage and started having aches and pains in my legs, and I had to see my physiotherapist. And I was always busy in meetings, and he was always busy giving somebody a massage. So when he was working with his hands, he couldn't take my calls. And when he tried to return my calls, I was busy in a meeting, with my phone on mute, put away. And I didn't see him calling me back. So we just kept going back and forth for a couple of days, sometimes even a few days, before I was able to get in and schedule that appointment. So I started thinking how to, improve the process and take the hassle out of that process. Started texting him, but it wasn't that much better, because when I texted him, he didn't see the text for a couple of hours. Then he texted me back. I didn't see the text for a couple of hours, and let's say he replied, "Hey, you can get in at 4 p.m." But I read the text at 3:30, so I just jumped into my car and took off to get to him. And I said, "I'm on my way." And then 5 to 4, just as I was parking, he texted me like, "Sorry, somebody else had slid in before you confirmed." Uh-huh. So that just frustrated me, and I started thinking, what would be the best way to improve that, and discussed with my partner Conrad, and we said like, we need to build software for this guy, but he was just a solo entrepreneur. He couldn't afford to pay for custom software built just for him. So then we started thinking like, maybe we should like build a platform and sell it as a subscription to all those individuals who work with their hands. So we started digging into it, and we realized that hair and beauty and wellness, like these all verticals, they have one thing in common. People work with their hands, and when they work with their hands, whether it's cutting somebody's hair or coloring it or painting nails or giving somebody a massage or doing their brows and lashes, when they work with their hands, they are not supposed to take phone calls. They are not supposed to reply to text messages, because they need to focus on that client sitting in their chair. So we realized that this is a huge undigitalized vertical, and that's a great opportunity to tap into, and we decided to launch Booksy.
I think that's a great story, and just to follow up on that, what is the business model for Booksy, and how do you look at acquisitions of salons and barbershops on your platform?
So the business model is pretty straightforward. We charge them flat monthly fee, that subscription. On average, it's $30 per month, because we operate in 7 different geographies. with US being the biggest and the fastest growing market for us. And it's roughly 50% of our business. And then 6 international markets, which obviously include Poland, where we are from, but also the UK, Spain, Brazil, Mexico, and South Africa. So those different markets, they have different price points. So on average, we charge businesses $30 per month. And that's it. On top of that, we are now building other revenue streams like lead generation, aka marketplace, payment processing. There is a couple more we are now thinking about, but the bread and butter for us is subscriptions.
Correct. And what was some of the hardest elements of onboarding the first few salons and the barbershops when you're trying to build it?
The toughest part was that, before Booksy existed, there were hardly any other platforms that offered online scheduling, because even if there were any, they had not grown big enough to educate the market and to make it a standard. So 5-6 years ago, when we were starting, the most common objection we would hear from salon owners, it was I prefer to have a personal touch with my clients. I prefer to speak with my clients. My clients prefer to speak with me. My clients are not gonna use it. My clients are too old. They don't use apps. My clients wanna keep that personal relationship. So nobody's gonna book with me online. They said they need to adjust their time based on personal preference. Somebody has longer hair, somebody has shorter hair, somebody, needs 60-minute massage, somebody else needs 90 minutes. So they had, a ton of objections. So the first couple of years were really tough because we had to prove that clients really wanted to book online, that clients, they want that, personal touch and experience when they are sitting in the chair. This is when they want undivided attention. And, after, the first couple of years, I guess we had enough traction and enough salons using Booksy and enough consumers using Booksy that the word of mouth started, spreading on both sides. And then salon owners started looking at those that were using Booksy. They were successful with it. Their business grew way faster than those that hadn't used Booksy, and they started realizing that they are missing something, and they started adopting Booksy, and since then we started growing super fast.
It's interesting that you if I'm not wrong, you started in Poland and then you moved on to other marketplaces.
It's good that you asked that, because the first market that we launched was the US. Poland was actually the second market. We translated the app into Polish and launched Poland as the second market. There is that saying that Poland has that curse of a 40 million country, because there is a lot of startups that start in Poland and they never get out of Poland, because it's a market that's big enough to be successful. And once you get tied up with this market and it becomes, when it's big enough and it's 100% of your business, then starting in a new market where you have to go through different struggles and hardships is always difficult, because then you need to take care of your biggest market, which is Poland, and then launching new markets is always way more difficult. So Konrad and I decided to launch in the US. We had thought, it was the most competitive market in the world. It was also the biggest market in the world. And we assumed that, if we succeed in the US, we can succeed anywhere else in the world. So that was our reasoning behind going into the US first in 2014, and then in 2015 we launched in Poland.
Oh, that's so interesting, because usually people say that you should be a market leader in a maybe a smaller niche and capture it. But I liked how you went to US, because it's a much bigger market. Would you advise it to others also? There are a lot of Indian and Chinese companies who dominate the local market, but they're not able to dominate, say, the US and European markets, where the lifetime value of a customer could be much higher.
I don't know if I would give it as a general advice, but in our case, that was definitely a good move, because if we had focused on Poland first, then we would miss something that is very unique about the US market, because US market is built way differently than all of our international markets. So in this space, nearly 70 people work as independent contractors. They just rent chairs, and only 30% of people work as W2 employees.
Okay.
And in Poland, in the UK, in Spain, it's the other way around. Vast majority of people work as employees. So in all those other markets, we need to deal with salon owners and salon managers. And in the US, we go after independent contractors, which is more difficult and easier at the same time. It's easier because the decision-making process is shorter. It's more difficult because these are smaller businesses with smaller tickets. So you need to be very smart and very cash efficient when acquiring them. But once you figure out how to acquire those independent contractors, then acquisition of larger salons is actually way easier, because you can still do it, much cheaper than any of your competitors. And then on those bigger salons, monetize much better because they are willing to pay higher tickets. So, in our case, it worked. I don't know if that was definitely serendipity, but I don't know if that's like a general advice I would give to everybody. So if we had started in Poland and built software for large salons and then focus and build a process to acquire those larger salons, then we would definitely not be as successful in the US as we are today.
Got it. And Stefan, in this beauty tech industry, which you had looked at, it was not digitized, but you both of you Europeans who went to US and captured it, and you were able to beat other hyper-funded startups who are trying to solve the same problem. Why do you think you were successful in solving this problem?
I guess there is 2 points to that. The first one is that we didn't really know anything about the US market. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand that. And that's when we realized that, this market is very much different than all the other markets, and that we need to focus on independent contractors. And most of our US competitors, they are going after salons, which is just, a fraction of that market. So I think, they just made an assumption, maybe based on how they operated, in other companies or in other verticals, and they just went after businesses, and we are going after, well, really consumers, because those independent contractors, they behave very much like consumers. So that's the first big difference between us and most of our competitors. The second difference is that there is a very high loyalty in this space, because up to 80% of appointments come from repeat clients. And all of our competitors who tried to build marketplaces in this space, they failed because they assumed that the blueprint that worked for Ubers and Airbnbs and eBays of this world would work for this vertical, and it simply doesn't. So I guess, because we were new to the market, we were more open-minded and humble, and we knew that we didn't know anything about the market, and we took our time to understand it. And I guess everybody else, they just took shortcuts and they tried to replicate models that worked, for other verticals or worked for them in their past jobs. And I think, this is what, made this vertical a graveyard full of companies that tried to build marketplace for the beauty, and they failed.
I think you said it beautifully, that you were humble and you wanted to solve the problem, and you really deep dive into it. And I wanted to understand for B2B and B2C marketplace founders, how do you drive supply and demand for marketplaces? And what should come first? Should it be supply or demand?
I've seen both approaches successful. I think that depends on the vertical, and I think this is this is homework everybody needs to do on their own, and this is why we are successful in the US, and a lot of marketplaces were not, because they just took a blueprint or an advice from somebody like, oh, you should focus on demand first, and then they failed, capturing the supply, or the other way around. So I don't think that like there is like one rule that everybody should follow. I think that's different. That depends on the vertical. That also depends on go-to-market strategy. So my advice is basically to do the homework and to understand what your market is like, how it works, how it behaves, and then you will understand and realize what is more critical for you.
Got it. And last 10 years, there have been a lot of micro influencers, and I got to put in like Kardashians have also brought in a lot of change in the industry. Do you think influencers will bring in a lot more change on how consumers are supposed to, look at beauty industry?
Oh, definitely. We are seeing that big time. And one of the reasons that, the salon market in the US is struggling, and more hairstylists and barbers and nail techs are going independent, is the rise of Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. Because what salons really do for them is that, they provide them clients and they take care of scheduling and of the admin part. So with platforms like Instagram, they can advertise, they can take pictures of their work, they can advertise it to their clients, and people just browse through pictures on Instagram and different hashtags like nails Miami, nails Atlanta, nails New York. And if they like it, then they check out who that nail stylist is and they try to book with them. So there is a lot of influencers who are also, contributing to that trend. And more stylists are going independent, and this is how they are acquiring clients, through social media, through influencers, and a lot of them become influencers on their own. I mean, that was something that blew my mind. Obviously, US is a huge market, but when a hairstylist or a barber or a nail tech has 500,000 followers or 1 million followers, that shows you how powerful social media are and how they also become influencers. So it's not only the Kardashians, but it's like, a lot of amazing artists who work in this industry, they also became influencers, and people don't even realize that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think micro influencers are going to change the industry more. And do you think AI and IoT will also change the beauty industry more going forward?
I don't know if they are gonna change, but they are definitely going to be like, an addition. Like we are already implementing NI to help predict booking patterns and to make it easier. So we are now working on the next generation of Booksy for salons and salon management. And this year we'll also start working on the next generation version of our customer facing app. So we are going to predict patterns and remind consumers like, hey, you haven't got a haircut in X weeks, or like, hey, the color that you got, like, probably you should refresh it, like you should get, you should get it redone. So based on different factors, because like different people with different hair textures, with different things that they had done, with like different stylists they went to, like everybody, like it's very unique on individual basis. But we are working on a predictive analytics, and I wouldn't even call it AI. In our case, it's just big data and predictive analytics, maybe with a touch of AI, to predict when is the best time for people to schedule, to check their stylist availability, and to propose them a date and time for that, so they don't need to spend time thinking about that. So these are those small bits and pieces we are working on. I think as AI and IoT progresses, there will be more use cases, and we'll definitely be looking how to apply it to Booksy and how to leverage it and to help the beauty industry.
Yeah, I think it needs to be seen, how it works out in future. And what are your thoughts on dynamic pricing for marketplaces, especially if you look at Uber,
Mhm,
they have the dynamic
mhm,
pricing, which consumers did not always like. But what are your thoughts?
mhm.
Should dynamic pricing be there for marketplaces?
I definitely believe it should be there, and that's something we are working on right now as well. However, we need to be cautious. As you said, consumers don't like it in many cases, so there need to be some kind of guardrails implemented, capping mechanisms. So what we are working on right now is to capture the right balance between consumers and service providers to make both happy, to maximize revenue for service providers, but at the same time not to exploit consumers who are in need of getting their hair done or nails done. So this is definitely something that many other industries have already adopted it. Like when we book airfare, we don't even think about that.
Correct.
We don't even question it, like why somebody bought a ticket a few days ago and it was like half the price I'm paying right now. Like it's a market standard, and I think it's going to become a market standard in many other industries. The question is how to do it in a smart way that like doesn't bother people and is perceived as a good practice.
Got it. And I believe COVID had been difficult for beauty industry,
Mhm,
especially hair salons and nail
mhm.
salons had to be shut down across the world. How did Booksy deal with COVID, and how are you helping out salons and barbershops now?
So as soon as markets went into the first wave of lockdowns in March and April last year, we developed a number of features to help them. So we introduced virtual consultations, so people could still schedule appointments with them and connect with their stylist via Zoom. So we implemented integration with Zoom, because when we typically think about the beauty industry, we think that it's all about making us look pretty, but it's also like our barbers and stylists, they are often our like therapists. It's also about the energy exchange. Like we go there and they know everything about our lives, about our families, about our jobs, because like we spend there 30, 40 minutes, maybe an hour, sometimes even a couple of hours every few weeks. And after years, they get to know us really well. So it's not only about getting our hair done, but it's also about that energy exchange. And people staying at home, they felt isolated, they felt lonely. So enabling both consumers and stylists to schedule those virtual consultations that partly address that problem, that help stylists to make some money, that help clients to take care of themselves, and it helped both sides to stay connected, to nourish those relationships. We also implemented vouchers and donations, so clients could support their stylists, because everybody knows, or back then everybody knew, that sooner or later those lockdowns would be lifted, and most clients wanted their stylists to stay in the business. They didn't want them to go bankrupt. So a lot of people supported them, and it was amazing to see how much support stylists got from their existing clients. We also introduced safety and healthy rules. So once markets started reopening, stylists could fill in some details, and we would show their clients how they are taking care of them and themselves, and how they are creating a safe and healthy environment for people to come in. So we developed like a dozen features like that to help the stylists weather the storm, and then create a safe and healthy environment for their clients to come in, because COVID is still around. And even though a lot of markets are now acting like nothing has happened, there is still a group of clients, and we are seeing that 20 to 30% of consumers have not returned yet. Maybe it's because they are waiting to get vaccinated, maybe because they lost their jobs and they don't have money, maybe it's something else, but there is still a lot of people that are afraid to sit in a chair and get their hair or nails done.
Stefan, congratulations on raising $70 million. You've also are you looking to expand into other countries, especially Southeast Asia and Latin market, or you want to be double down on the markets you currently are in?
We are definitely doubling down on our existing markets, especially here in the US. I think we'll expand to Southeast Asia and Latin America at some point, and across Europe, but it's too early to do that. We believe that this is a winner takes all dynamics, and we want to be the one that wins it. So we are already the most downloaded and the most used scheduling app in the US, in the UK, in Brazil, in Spain, in Poland, and South Africa. And we just don't want to lose that position and just continue the growth until we really win all of these markets.
Interesting. And, I wanted to understand, how do you approach decision-making frameworks, and what is the right way to respond when, decisions don't go as you plan, especially when it would have happened in 2020. What is your decision-making framework?
I guess the most important thing is to be honest with yourself and with the team. So, and be transparent, because this creates an environment where you can really rely on your team, and you can get honest feedback from them when they are not afraid to give you that feedback, and when they know that that feedback is heard. So this is what we've been trying to build within Booksy for years, and it definitely paid off in 2020. Because if it wasn't the team that was very loyal, very engaged, very motivated, we wouldn't have made it. We wouldn't be so successful. So building that culture and building a strong team prior to the pandemic, it really helped us to weather the storm and to make pivots and to make quick changes, because the whole team trusted the leadership team. And then the leadership team felt like we are getting good feedback from our teams, from our markets, and we can trust that feedback. So it works both ways.
All right. And so I quickly want to do the top three. What's your favorite business book?
The favorite one is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And I have already read it twice. And I wish I read it, in 2000 when I was starting my first company. I read it definitely too late, and I think I'm gonna read it for the third time in the next few weeks. Every time I read it, every time I read it twice, but I get something else out of that book. It's oh, how come I missed that? Oh, I forgot he wrote about that. So it's a great book, highly recommended.
No, absolutely. I think this is one of the most recommended books from all the guests on the board. And, if you could go back in time when you started working on Booksy, what is the one thing you would have done differently, or focused on just one thing?
The one thing that I would have done differently is I would seek out for help and ask people sooner than later and more frequently. Being raised in Poland, in a communist country, I was brainwired that I have to figure everything on my own, that there is nobody that would help you, that there was no pay it forward culture, that there was nobody you can rely on, except of your family and close friends. But business wise, everybody just kept their knowledge to themselves. Nobody really wanted to share it. And this is what I love about the startup culture and about the US. And if I had adopted that sooner, I think we would have done just less mistakes.
All right. And do you have any favorite online tools, example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom?
I hate Zoom, to be honest. And I just started embracing Slack. We had not been using it from the very beginning. We actually started using Slack around 12 months ago. So I'm still an old school guy, and I think I prefer email than Slack, but I'm learning and seeing more and more benefits of using Slack.
Correct. And so, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about Booksy?
Well, you can easily reach out to me, emailing me at Stefan, Stefan, at booksy.com. And you can go to our website, booksy.com, and hope you will find everything you need on there.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. Stefan, I really enjoyed my conversation with you, and best wishes for the future endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rakit. Thanks for having me here.